Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's webinar. I'm Josh Jones, and today you are tuned into Strategic Enterprise Sourcing 101, brought to you by GEM. I'm joined by some lovely participants and panelists today, but before we get started, I would like to introduce Zoe Wren, who joins us from GEM.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm so excited to be here today and to hear our great panelists, Brandy, April, and Keri, share their learnings and best practices on building a winning enterprise sourcing strategy. GEM is proud to be sponsoring this webinar as we strive to be great partners with enterprise talent acquisition teams and empower them to engage their entire talent network and optimize sourcing efforts. We have a quick intro video to GEM to show you, and then we can dive into the discussion. If the video piques your interest and you would like to learn more about GEM, please feel free to request a demo. Thank you. Josh, feel free to take it away.
Many organizations find it difficult to attract qualified talent that will drive the next wave of innovation at their company. And we're seeing this challenge across the industry, from large enterprise customers like Cisco and McDonald's to agile tech companies with amazing brands like Slack, Peloton, and DoorDash. That's why GEM was created, with the fundamental belief that the traditional ways of recruiting, like managing candidates from inbound sources like career pages, posting on job sites, etc., are no longer sufficient to attract the levels of top talent required to compete in today's digital economy, especially as it becomes harder and harder to find the right talent for key roles. So think data scientists, software engineers, or really any hard-to-fill role, because more and more companies are competing for candidates across the same limited talent pools. The challenge of maintaining a healthy pipeline is compounded by the need to attract for diverse talent. For organizations that value diversity, this makes the pipeline problem even harder because our inbound applicants don't always represent the most diverse talent pools, and we have no control over who applies. These challenges have driven companies to look at better ways to engage with talent where it is in the market. And that's why companies from Cisco to Twilio are taking a more proactive approach to engaging with passive talent rather than waiting for the right people to apply. That's why GEM was started. GEM's founders were engineering managers at high growth companies. As hiring managers, they quickly realized that the traditional tech stack for recruiting wasn't built to support the passive nurture of talent. Because ATSs were designed to track inbound applicants, this leaves most recruiting organizations stuck with managing relationships and passive talent outreach in manual, time-consuming, and error-prone processes like spreadsheets, one-off in-mails, and emails. This means a poor candidate experience, and so many missed opportunities in engaging with top talent when the timing is right. GEM was created to fill that void that exists in the market, a purpose-built platform to manage passive talent engagement and give recruiting teams that workflow, the automation, and analytics they need to be more efficient and consistently build great and diverse teams. And one of the great things about GEM is because all of these passive talent relationships are now tracked in one central place, you'll get much more visibility and predictability into your own hiring funnels, allowing your team to make more data-driven approach to recruiting and hiring.
Big thank you to Zoe and the team over at GEM for making today's webinar possible. Waiting for all of our panelists to come back. Today's webinar is being recorded, so everyone who registered today, by the end of the day tomorrow, you will receive an email from us that will contain a link to today's recorded content. You can watch the recorded content at your leisure. You can also share it with friends and colleagues that may have missed today's live broadcast. On the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat feature. There's 2 tabs to the chat feature, so try to keep the generalized chat on the chat side. And then if you've got actual questions for our panelists today, use the Q&A side of the chat. That way we can know where to look and get to those questions a little bit faster. There's also a link to various offers on the right-hand side of the screen. Right now, we've got an offer for a GEM demo if you'd like to set up one of those. And then later on in the broadcast, we'll have 2 additional downloadable offers available from Jim. And without any further ado, let's dive into today's discussion. I'd like to start off with just kind of some introductions. I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to go around and counterclockwise on my screen. And Keri, you're first up in the upper hand right of my screen. So could you give us a quick overview of your expertise and what brings you here?
Sure. My name is Keri Dann. I am the non-technical sourcing manager at Momentive, which is the maker of SurveyMonkey. I have been a sourcing manager for about 2 years now. Before that, I was a sourcer. I actually have a background where I've been one of the original sourcers on 2 sourcing teams as they were being built. So I think that I bring a lot of perspective in terms of starting from scratch and building a world-class team.
Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to go around the circle. Brandy, you're up next. Can you give us a brief overview of your background?
Hi, my name is Brandy. I am Global Talent Sourcing Manager at Box, so overseeing a tech as well as sales and team in Poland. Started off initially my career within recruiting, done various roles as recruiter, senior recruiter, and then started managing a team of recruiters, and then moved on to manage a team of sourcers at Box.
Very nice. And April, you're next.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm April Holcomb. I'm the Managing Director of Sourcing and Research at ChenMed. And this marks, I guess I'm the oldest here in the room. This is my 30 years in sourcing. I started out before the internet, so it's kind of scary when you think about how we used to do it. But I know there's some people on the call that can relate to that. So glad to be here. Thank you.
I definitely, well, I can't say completely before the internet, but I do remember those early days where it was much more on the phone than on LinkedIn. That's for sure. Which kind of, I think the narrative of sourcing has changed over the years. If you look at maybe the late 90s into the 2000s to present day. So I'd like to kick off this discussion by defining what sourcing is. Let's just start there with our panelists today. Keri, I'll let you start.
Sure. I think you're right. I think there are a few variations of sourcing out there. For the sake of starting broad, I would say identifying and engaging talent with the intention of converting them into active candidates is probably the best, most broad definition. It's safe to say there are different methods of approach, which I know that we'll discuss that more on the webinar.
Outstanding. And Brandy, April, do you have anything to add to that definition? Is there?
I think Keri covered it well, but I'd also agree that sourcing is really a strategic function in attracting top talent through creative ways and innovative ways. So while we don't carry the candidate through the full life cycle process, we're definitely influencing those hiring decisions.
Absolutely.
And everyone in the audience, please, in the chat, tell us your thoughts and opinions as well, and we will do our best to include you in the conversation as we move forward. I think part of sourcing, and I think there's different camps within it, right? There's sourcers that kind of do lead gen and they build lists of names, I guess. And then there's sourcers that are reaching out to candidates and they're engaging candidates and maybe doing some preliminary screening. And I think there's some that even take it a little bit further, and then the line starts to get a little fuzzy. Like, are they more of a sourcer or are they more of a recruiter? What are your thoughts on sourcers engaging with candidates, and should they screen, and how far should they take the process? And Brandy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think sourcers should absolutely engage with candidates. We have a job, especially in today's market, to start selling our candidates from the moment we reach out to them. So with that, there are a lot of things that are on the recruiter's plates, and our sourcers are really able to give a one-of-a-kind experience while also making sure that they're subject matter experts. So they know what's going on in the market and they understand what's going to drive the candidate and what's the most effective communication style to use on these candidates. Also, at the same time, I agree that sourcers should be taking phone screens, but I believe that you need to form that relationship with your recruiter and decide what's going to be most effective to get the job done. Some sourcers are there to really deliver market knowledge and really understand what's going on and be that subject matter expert to deliver data and statistics. And then in other cases, you do need to get on the phone to help close the role because we're just moving as quickly as possible.
I can't agree more. And I think that's such a key element to this is I want to be careful with what I say here. I feel like there's still some teams out there that maybe view sourcing as a more junior position, or they're not at the same level as the recruiting team. I would say that that's not true. And I think in some of those situations and in other situations, you may have sourcers that are not necessarily subject matter experts yet. It's like they're jumping the gun, they're putting the cart in front of the horse. They're not really doing a deep dive into what the business needs before they start their process. And I think it's very, very important that they understand the mission, they understand what is being presented, because especially in today's market, with the level of competition among these candidates, there's not a lot of margin for error. So everybody involved with the process needs to understand the jobs very, very well. So we're kind of talking about that relationship between sourcers and recruiters, which makes me think of swim lanes, right? We got to know what our process is, what our role in the mission is. And so I want to talk about the swim lanes between sourcing and recruiting, and how can these be defined, and any suggestions around that. And April, I'd like to start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I lead a large sourcing team here, and our sourcing team is broken out by corporate, executive, IT, clinical, and then market. So different teams, very different hiring managers. But in order to scale, because we're growing at a clip of 50 to 60% a year, in order to scale, we had to create that uniformity across all lines of sourcing. And so what we have done is we've created an SLA between our sourcers and our recruiters. And we also include all of our sourcers on the intake calls with all of the hiring managers, so they are an active part of that process. But the SLA, and I know people that are sourcing here, it's going to sound great to you, but we require that the recruiter respond to a candidate, a source candidate, within 24 hours. And so those are lines that have been drawn, and it makes it much easier to execute, because I know there's a lot of blame game that goes on between sourcers and recruiters. There's a lot of candidates that are sometimes lost, and we just wanted to present it to where any candidate that a sourcer submits is a gift wrapped in pretty paper and a bow, and it should be treated as such. So, yeah.
100%. Anything else to add? Keri, maybe, or April?
Sure. I would add to that every time we have when we're talking about onboarding and building these TA functions, one of the critical parts of training a new recruiter or a new sourcer that comes onto the team is to define what that recruiter-sourcer partnership looks like. And similar to April, we've standardized what that looks like. We definitely believe in running your own desk and creative freedom within that partnership, but we have outlined some basic responsibilities that the sourcer owns, that they're the subject matter expert in, that the recruiter owns, that they're the subject matter expert in. And we really talk about and hope to achieve buy-in across the entire team on how well sourcers and recruiters can complement one another as they're working on a rec or to support a certain area of the business.
And I'm pausing.
Definitely a partnership.
And I'm pausing just in case anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Keri and April. And I think we've all discussed in our own time that sourcers are not inferior or superior to recruiters, but it is a true partnership, and one can't be done without the other.
I think the best teams are kind of taking what the team players are good at, right? So I think sourcers sometimes have a different skill set than recruiters, but both parts of the components are equally valuable. And without those two components working very, very well, TA is not going to be as successful. In addition to swim lanes, sourcing teams need to align with stakeholders at different times. And as I mentioned before, and hopefully this is becoming less true, but it seems like there are some leaders within organizations that might not place as high a value on sourcing. So what are some methods or tactics for managing these relationships, managing the way sourcing is perceived, and maybe, I guess that's piggybacking on some of these SLAs that we talked about?
I can start if you'd like, Josh.
Sure. Yeah.
We actually went out and did a roadshow between the sourcing and the recruiting leaders to explain to the hiring managers the role that each of us have. And so, sorry about that.
Sorry.
So the roles were clearly defined, and we did it in that roadshow fashion to where they understood exactly what the roles were and how each complement the other. So that was a really important, winning factor for us when we set up this team. It's a brand new team, only a couple of years old now.
I love that idea, April. I would say our leaders at Box absolutely value our sourcers. And the reason why is because the ultimate goal is to have a shared North Star between sourcer and recruiter. So what that means is they are partnering on getting the best candidates through to the end of the process. So metrics are aligned, as well as making sure that the sourcers are getting really quality hires. So yes, recruiting phone screens are absolutely important, but the ultimate goal is to find the best talent. So that means our leaders understand that it's an entire team behind your role. So we care about your role just as much as you care about your position. And when a new leader joins Box, our recruiters and sourcers really do a wonderful job at coming together and explaining how the sourcer partners with the recruiter and how they're sort of a trifecta, including the recruiting coordinator as well.
And at Momentive, when we have an open search, it's standard practice for the sourcer and the recruiter to sync on a weekly or bi-weekly basis with the hiring manager. And let's face it, there are some times when a whole week has gone by and there's still not a great candidate in the pipeline. So something that we really encourage our sourcing team to do is always to come with content. Speaking of having different subject matter expertise, it's our jobs to inform the hiring managers why they aren't seeing candidates, what the market looks like. And over the past several years, there has been demand for, I have a strong desire to hire a non-male into this role. I want to see, female identified candidates. And so if we don't come to that sync with a female candidate, we come to that sync with information on what the market looks like, how much representation there is amongst qualified talent in the market. And then we talk about who we're outreaching, how many people we've spoken with, why they haven't been qualified. And I really think that it's coming with that content that helps to build a positive brand with the hiring managers, even when they're not necessarily seeing the candidates that they want to see, because they feel like they're getting informed. They feel like they understand what's going on with the search. And again, it just strengthens that partnership that the recruiter and the sourcer have with the hiring manager on that search.
And to piggyback off of that, Keri, I absolutely agree with you. I also think it's crucial that our sourcers are developing those relationships with hiring managers on their own. So if the recruiter is out on vacation or can't jump into this hiring manager one-on-one, our sourcers can fill in the blank.
Yep.
And I think too, sorry.
Go ahead.
The thing that we kind of left off, and I know Brandy and Keri would agree, is not only sourcers finding passive talent and great talent, but they're consultants and they're not order takers. And the other fact of it is they're also brand ambassadors. Sometimes they're the very first introduction to the company, and that role encompasses all of those things, and they need to be present to be successful.
I think that's very true. They're brand ambassadors, and they're kind of at the forefront of gathering that competitive intel, which, when done right, that can kind of drive strategy in a huge way. Which kind of, and this has come up in the chat a couple of times from a few people, which kind of brings me to metrics. What are some of the metrics that we should be paying attention to? What should we be measuring? How is it measured? Do we revisit metrics and maybe correct them? Like maybe we're measuring the wrong thing, or if we missed the mark or things like that. What are your thoughts on that? And rather than call on somebody, is there anybody that wants to take the lead on the first answer?
I can take the lead on the first answer.
Okay.
So I will say it's actually been something that has been up for discussion lately. Historically, we have set an offer goal, and then we do use GEM, which gives you a really great shot at everything from outreach through the bottom of the funnel through hire. And so we've always set an offer goal, but then, told the story with what was happening in the pipeline. But as we've continued to evolve and wanted to iterate and started answering really smart questions, like this quarter, we've started visiting the idea of setting metrics to interviews that are driven, since that's more within the realm of control of the sourcer. So this is the first quarter that we're kicking it off, so I'll let you know how it goes later. But we will be setting goals based on the search and historical conversion rates for sourcers to generate hiring manager and quote unquote on-site or panel interviews. And we believe that by driving interviews into the funnel in conjunction with the recruiter, also driving interviews into the funnel, ultimately an offer will happen. And so like the greater emphasis should be on making it happen and where that starts.
Agreed that driving those interviews into the funnel is absolutely important. We look at it a little bit different. So we do goal off of offer extends. And the reason being is that we have most of our sourcers support roles that are extremely low inbound or really need diversity behind it. So that's how we think of it, where our sourcers really do have a great shot at actually getting the candidate to the end of the funnel. And then we're also looking at, for the upcoming quarter, how do we start metricing off building a bench? So that way, when we do have a new role open, we have candidates ready to go because we've just developed such great relationships with them.
I like that you mentioned a bench, and it kind of leads me to the next question, which is not exactly a bench, but talent pipelines. Talent pipelines, talent networks, they're a huge benefit to the sourcing process because, to your point, it's going to speed things up. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. What advice do you have for creating talent networks, and what are best practices? We kind of know the why, we know the reason, but how do you do this? What is the how? Keri, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think the most important part of creating a talent network is to do it consistently. And even if that's just consistency in how you're naming your talent pool, because you need to be able to, you're not going to remember all of the work that was done in creating these talent pools 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 1 year ago. So you need to know what your system is, whether it be tags or how you name that specific pool of talent, so that you or whoever, like if you have moved on and you're working on different roles now, whoever comes in behind you can just run with it and not have to try and figure out what's going on or where to find people. We are actually standing up GEM campaigns right now because we feel like there's value in delivering valuable content and not just traditional outreach in like the sense of, do you want a job? We got a job, but more to it than that. So once again, it's something that's evolving. I think it's something that companies can continue to do better and better, but that's where we are right now on our journey.
I think for us, we're really open to just always having a coffee chat. The role doesn't have to be open for you to actually have a relationship with the candidate. And that's really been a saving grace for some of our top tier sourcers that know how to build a bench, that know how to nurture talent. I also say use platforms like GEM, as Keri mentioned, using some of their features of internal sourcing, and then really optimize your CRM. So you can go back in, you can find your top bench, you can find your silver medalist, and you can do drip campaigns so you can continue to engage with that talent.
I know our pipelining is different in that we're moving across the country. So we set up medical clinics. Right now we're in 12 states, but we continue to grow. So we have advance warning on when those will open. And so we're building pipeline ahead of demand in that regard. But I know the companies that don't have that kind of growth pattern won't be able to do that. But the other thing we do we have discussions with our leaders frequently, talking with them about, if there's anyone at risk or if we're outpacing somebody's career where we need to look. So our goal is to always have that talent available ahead of demand. Perfect world, it's not at 100%, but we're getting there.
Brandy, I like how you mentioned that it's not necessarily like rec driven or offer driven. It's really about just kind of laying the groundwork and starting these conversations. And I think more and more teams are starting to focus on that. I had a conversation earlier this week with a team that they basically host kind of fireside chats with engineering leaders and or what does the hiring process look like within this organization or within this team. And it makes candidates kind of feel comfortable and safe. So rather than fully putting their name in the hat or going through the process, they can get a sense of what it's like to interview with this company and what the hiring leaders are about and what their vision is. And they can kind of do it in a roundabout way. And then that way, when they do make the decision and they're ready to apply or submit an application or do a formal interview, you've laid a very good foundation and there's a rapport there. And that would probably help with ghosting. I've heard that ghosting is kind of an issue. It's kind of hard to ghost somebody you've had coffee with, probably. I'm kind of looking over my questions. How can sourcers prioritize candidate experience, especially in environments where speed is everything? Many sourcers are handing off candidates to other team members who will move the process to an offer and to a hire. So how can sourcers ensure the good candidate experience is continuing even after the handoff? And that's assuming that all the sourcers in the audience are actually delivering a good candidate experience.
I could take that one. So speed is everything. So that means that we need to meet candidates where they're at today rather than always asking them to come to us. So candidate experience is one thing that we actually can control. So we have to make sure that we're actually following up in a timely manner, reaching out to candidates to keep them engaged, communicating with our recruiters and letting them know, like, this candidate is on a tight timeline. We have to quickly push them through, while also being able to do those initial screens, understanding exactly what the candidate needs and what they're looking for in their next opportunity. On the internal side, there is an element of educating hiring managers as well. So we want to help them understand how the competitor's process is, how quickly individuals are moving, but then also making sure that they're ready to sell as well to help win the candidates over. So sourcers should absolutely be a part of that engagement when candidates, when they're closed, they're following up with congratulatory emails as well. They are the reason why the candidate is actually joining the company.
I love that. And I just want to add, so we're talking about speed. I'm aware of an organization right now that actually lost a candidate over a week. The candidate wanted to start a week later and the hiring manager just couldn't wait. And so they ended up losing the candidate, and that's probably it's going to cost them more than a week now. I mean, it was literally like 7 days. And so now they have to start over from square one. So speed is crucial, but I think also within a candidate experience, if a candidate tells you their timeline and they say, look, I can start early June or whatever, maybe that's too far out, but be mindful of what their wants are and what their timeline looks, because this is all kind of a connection of different timelines intersecting.
Also, that's a perfect opportunity to meet the candidate where they're at, right? If you need them to start sooner, what can you do to actually get them to start sooner? Can you offer them a bonus, or can you just say, hey, I'll wait 7 days so I don't have to do another 3 months of sourcing?
Right. 100%.
I think it is so important to move quickly, like you said, Brandy, but in the spirit of meeting a candidate where it's at, there's also almost the opposite side of that, of like your willingness to court the candidate, because perhaps the candidate is so passive or has other personal matters going on, or a wedding that they're planning that's happening 3 months from now. So I think it's really important. I mean, it's really, really simple. Sometimes it's as simple as just taking really good notes and then setting reminders for yourself to follow up. I think good sourcing sometimes is just about like being really good at the basics. And I think that's the basic, you know, saying, hey, I still haven't forgotten about you. We spoke 3 weeks ago. I told the hiring manager about you. I know you're planning the wedding. I'm so excited, you know, building that relationship. I remember planning my wedding. It was wild times. You know, I'm going to check in with you, you know, in a couple of weeks and see how things are going. And so I think it's really important to show the candidate, hey, I'm willing to move as fast as you're willing to move, but I'm also willing to wait and make you feel like you are the only person that we are interested in for this search.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's okay to tell the candidate that there is no update, right? To let just to let them know something. And I know we're fearful sometimes if we don't have important information to relay to that candidate that we tend to avoid it. But if we can just let them know that we don't know anything, we're still interested. The process is slow, but we're still interested in you.
I think the irony of candidate experience is that we all know what good candidate experience. It's so basic and it's so easy. But the irony is it's very difficult, especially if you're managing a lot of recs and dealing with a lot of hiring managers and a lot of candidates. It's hard to implement these very basic human touches, keeping people informed, letting them know that you're thinking about them. Sometimes no news is news. If it's Friday, let them know I'm still thinking about you. Don't have an update from the team, things like that. Just a quick note, there's another offer over there to the right of your screen, 6 secrets of finding qualified talent. It's a free white paper to download offered from Jim, so please check that out. Moving right along, my next question is understanding the mission. I think being a great storyteller is often a critical part of being a great sourcer. We kind of touched upon this earlier in the call. What tips do you have that will help sourcers discover the great stories their team might have? How can sourcers share in the overarching mission and success of the organization as a whole? April, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. So we've created an event at our organization, and it's called Pitch Perfect. We do it once a quarter, and we invite different leaders. One, so it's leaders from the organization that the sourcers may not always have access to. So it gets them to know that leader, but at the same time, we invite someone from each of our business units to, we create a panel much like this, and we ask them questions, each of the panelists questions about, you know, what makes us different from our competitors, and we have the panelists listen, but the whole team is there, so they're getting, someone could say one thing different, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's great. I know with Brandy, I wrote down the fact that the shared North Star, right? I thought that was brilliant. And you just might hear one phrase or something that will help you. But hearing it, one from the leader, but 2 from your peers, the event's been quite a success here, and we've been doing it for over 2 years now.
I'm not going to be one of those people that makes everyone grumpy and say, we got to get back to the offices and we need to return to you know, the cubicles. But I'll tell you, early in my TA career, there's nothing like being in a bullpen with a bunch of recruiters and a bunch of sourcers, because you pick up so much intel and you learn the process a lot better. So I think one of the key ways to really understand those story elements is hearing other people on the team talk about it, whether it's an engineering leader or sales leader, somebody from the C-suite, and your peers, listening to how they close candidates, listening to the questions that they're asking, all of those things, and getting referrals as well. You know, the 5-finger approach. Every person that you talk to, that person should be introducing you to 3 to 5 other people. Maybe not even for that particular rec, but that's how you're going to build your network and snowball all of this information into your sourcing methodology, and you'll start filling recs faster. I want to start getting to some of the questions in the chat. I apologize. I've kind of glossed over some of these, and it looks like there were some questions actually in the chat, possibly, but let me jump over to the Q&A tab. The first question is from April. What tools and strategies are you using to find candidates in a tough labor market? Does anybody want to?
Oh, it's another April. Welcome. There's not many of us.
Is that a sign, April? Are you going to answer, April, or should we?
I can answer that. So I don't think, our tools and techniques, I don't think that they have changed, but I believe that our tenacity has changed in using those tools. So it's one, thinking about the candidate, and again, like Brandy said, meeting them where they are, and just really changing your focus, right? So it's not, a lot of times you may reach out to them and you don't hear from them. So it's reaching out in different modes, and it may be leaving a video message, or, just using all of the technologies that we have available to us now, and really making that candidate feel special, that, you're interested in them and that they weren't just randomly picked.
I agree with that. There's no deep secret that the three of us have that other sourcing leaders and sourcers don't have. I think as sourcing leaders, we speak for the three of us when we say, like, it's, especially in this market, sometimes it's hard to motivate your team. And it's also, you just have to realize that sometimes people just get stuck in their habits. Like, I'm sourcing, I'm going to LinkedIn Recruiter, to GEM, to ATS. And literally this morning on my team meeting, I said, hey, we had Sourcing 101 training a few months ago, and we talked about what a Google X-ray is. And I don't know how many of you are using Google X-ray on a daily basis, but look, I'm going to do a 3-minute demo and show you that I'm going to turn out 3 profiles that nobody on this team has viewed. And that's what happened. And I think we just need to continue to challenge ourselves to get out of our comfort zones, to use the technologies that are available to us. I don't even necessarily think you have to have every platform under the sun. I think you just need to be willing to continue to try and learn new search methods, and in different places too.
Yeah, I totally agree. Google search or X-ray search is great as well. And like getting back into a Boolean string and understanding how to really create one has been helpful. But one thing I really love is our team does sourcing jams. So if we're struggling on a rec, it's like all sourcers on deck. Let's get together. Let's really search for this role. And we're all going to pull candidates to put in this project. And we're going to set this our sourcer up so they can be successful. I also love still just going to networking events. Like a lot of times, I know it's weird in the era of COVID, but still just showing up and at a happy hour and you bump into someone and you start chatting with them and you find out they're a sales engineer. So perfect. I have someone that is sourcing sales engineers, or I am the sourcer for sales engineers. Let me make sure I get your contact, because you may not be interested right now, but after this happy hour, you may be interested.
I love the sourcing jams. And I would, just to piggyback on that, if you can get a conference room or something like that and do a sourcing jam in person with a group of people, I've been with teams that we've done that in the past. We would get a room and it was just bring your toughest rec and your laptop and let's just see what we can come up with. And I can't think of a single meeting where we didn't come up with candidates for somebody that somebody would show up with zero. I have this rec, it's been open for 3 weeks and I've got nothing. And they would come to one of the sourcing jams and they would leave with some candidates. And it's one of the best ways to learn. And it's one of the best ways to elevate your team so you can get the rest of your team performing as well as your best performer. Going to some other questions. I feel like we might've touched on this earlier, but Sarah did ask about how we measure sourcers' productivity in KPIs. I don't think we talked about KPIs. I feel like there's a nuance there. Is there anything to add related to that, or should we keep going? Okay. Let's see. Jared asks, what tech is used to help with sourcer productivity? What tech is used to make sourcer and recruiter communication more efficient? That's an interesting angle. I would say Jim is a really good solution. Any thoughts from our panelists here?
I think it's just keeping great notes in your CRM and understanding where the candidates are. And for us, again, that SLA is helping because everyone understands what's expected of them, and so it forces them into the process.
And then speaking of managing sourcing productivity, we recently ran a quarterly spiff where we metriced it on outreach, which is something that is not always like a KPI type of metric that we follow, but we know that when we're talking about the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, it all starts with outreach. And so in order to incentivize sorcerers, we basically created a contest and some qualifications, and we used a weekly gem report to see, of all the sorcerers on the sourcing team, who did the most outreach and who's going to get a $50 gift card this week. And so it was really great because we had a really tall order in Q1 and we outperformed. I mean, it had wonderful results. Like, our sourcing team crushed it this quarter. And I think a lot of it has to do with being able to manage that productivity on a weekly basis and in real time. You know, we would send out like midweek Slack updates, like, all right, you know, somebody's in the lead, who's going to catch them? And it was fun. It was fun, cool, and it was effective too. Showed impact.
That's great.
I think playfully competitive teams often do the best. So it doesn't need to be aggressive and toxic, but if you can create that gamified environment where people are really kind of competing with each other and there's prizes and recognition and things like that, it's going to drive a lot of success. Dawn asks, would love to get perspective on navigating an hourly entry-level market. I don't know if is anybody here working on entry-level roles right now? Dawn, maybe connect with me on LinkedIn. I might be able to introduce you to some folks that can help. David asks, does your company do informational interviews in advance of positions actually being open?
Oh,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Brandy. No, take it away.
I was going to say our team does. A lot of times when our sourcer, if you just connect with our sourcer and you may say that you're interested in a role, they'll try to get you in contact with the appropriate person. That way, when the role does open, they can start thinking in advance of it.
And to everybody in the audience, I've added the third offer from Jim. It's a customer story from Dropbox. So you can download that, and I highly recommend checking out that narrative. Sharif asks, how important, if at all, is developing relationships with sourcers at other companies? I know what I'm thinking, but I'm going to let the panelists answer.
I think that's why we're all here, right? Is we want to be involved with other people and other thought leaders because, I mean, I learned so much from both Brandy and from Keri just being on this panel. And so I think it's important to have a strong network of sourcers in your available to you. Yeah.
Yeah. We're in the midst, our team is in the midst of putting together our next in-person event, Talent 42, that's going to happen in June in Seattle at the Seattle Art Museum. If you're not able to join us in person, we do a lot of digital conferences as well. And I can tell you, when I was in a sourcing seat and in a recruiting seat, trying to learn as much as I can about this amazing industry, I was attending a lot of conferences. And initially, it was the sessions. You go to these sessions and you're writing as fast as you can, and you're typing as fast as you can. And there's so much good information in these sessions. But it wasn't very long before I realized that the real hidden gem of these conferences and events was the networking and connecting with peers. Leaving an event and having people that you can reach out to and say, hey, these are the challenges that our team is facing. We've done X, Y, Z. What do you think? And a lot of times those answers are going to come from outside of your organization if you have a good network. So I highly, highly recommend connecting with folks outside of your organization. And if you're inside of an organization for a long time, we treat tenure in different ways. Oh, this person's been at this company for 10 years. They must be amazing. That's probably true, but I would argue if you've been at the same organization for 10 years, you might have tunnel vision too. So you're just very entrenched in that methodology. So definitely connect to people outside of your organization.
Joshua,
yes.
I was thinking about one of the questions about the metrics, and we didn't have anything to add, but one thing that I thought about that I think might add some value in calling out the relationship between sourcers and recruiters is we've done everything that we can to deconflict metrics with sourcers and with recruiters to encourage those really strong partnerships. So recruiters, while some of them do source, and when they have a sourced hire, it's celebrated, they do not have performance metrics that are directly tied to how many candidates they source. And we always like to think about what's best for the candidate. So in the event that that recruiter and a sourcer are partnering together, if the recruiter finds a candidate that needs to be further developed or nurtured, like they will lean on their partner, the sourcer, to do that. And I think by having those metrics separated in accordance with those swim lanes is really critical for the success of the partnership.
I'm really glad that you added that. Thank you.
Sure, of course.
Any thoughts from our panelists? Okay, I'm going to move on to Lindsay asks, outside of personalization, what have you seen to be the key differentiators, say that right, in high response rates for sourcers doing outbound prospecting?
Knowing your audience.
Yeah.
I'll also add to that our teams are not afraid to follow up. So being tenacious, but not being over aggressive, and not being afraid to reach out to candidates more than once to remind them, like, want to put this at the top of your message again, really interested in having a conversation.
And I think, like we talked earlier, is just different modes of reaching out to them. So all of the reach outs aren't exactly the same or from the same source.
I was sharing with the group before we started that the sourcer on our team that had the highest response rate had a really, really long message compared to like what you would typically see as best practices. It was just chock full of information. And so tying it back to the sentiment of knowing your audience, that sourcer knew that the people that he was reaching out to in the specialty and the level that they were just kind of, give it to me straight, tell me all the information. I want to know what your tech stack is. I want to know who I'll be reporting into. I want to know all the things before I will even consider saying yes. Whereas like someone who is reaching out to a sales account executive might be more justful and, say, hey, you might as well reply to me because my CRM is going to reach out to you at least 5 more times because they appreciate what a CRM is because they work with one every day. So I think it's really, just to build on what I meant by that, I think it's really important to tailor, that's not even necessarily personalization, but to still tailor it to your audience in a way that they can appreciate it.
Totally. Shout out to Mike Chuidian. I don't know if you're on this call today in the audience, but Mike Chuidian sends out some really long messages. He's got good response rates. So there you go. Moving on, Susanna asks, how do sourcers position themselves externally to candidates in outreach messages and their LinkedIn profiles? That's an interesting question. I would say that it's probably not very dissimilar to how the recruiters do it. I bet it's kind of aligned. What thoughts from everyone here?
No, I think that it is aligned, and the messaging is pretty consistent on both teams. A lot of times, what we'll do is, instead of just going in for the ask on the first message that we send out, it's more of a brand awareness message, and then the second one may be for the ask, only because our company isn't as well known as the other panelists here, so we've had to alter that.
Nikki asks, do any of you have screeners or just the sourcer and then the recruiter is the next step in the process?
Our sourcers take the initial screen and then they'll hand them off to the hiring manager. Or if our recruiter takes the initial screen, that means our sourcer found the candidate and handed it off to the recruiter, and the recruiter will take them and then hand them off to the hiring manager. But we don't do 2 talent acquisition screens because you're wasting the candidate's time at that point.
Same. We
follow the same.
Is anybody here using coordinators? So maybe you have recruiters, sourcers, and coordinators, or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, coordinators to schedule, but not necessarily to take screens.
Princess asks, when it comes to bandwidth, how do you manage or cap the amount of recs a sourcer works on at a time? That's going to be probably, your mileage may vary depending on where you're traveling.
So this was actually something our team has spent a lot of time developing, but we do something called sourcing sprints for our non-technical roles, because we found that the best way for sourcers to actually drive impact on the roles that they're supporting is to have fewer recs. And so by that, I mean anywhere from maybe 2 to 4. And that they just work on those in a highly concentrated manner to drive early and continuous delivery. And they typically work on that for about 3 weeks before it's reevaluated whether or not they need to stay on that role or not.
I like that thought process. We do ours a little bit different. So because there's a few levels on our team, it can go anywhere from 6 to 8 recs, or some of our sourcers can hold 10 recs. And those actually would be more of our junior sourcers who are holding those many recs because they haven't started doing phone screens yet. So they have more time and they're figuring out how to actually attract talent, how quickly they need to move to actually build pipeline, and then really recalibrating on the actual role and understanding exactly what the hiring manager wants, where some of our more senior and tenured sourcers are already knee deep in it, doing their phone screens, understand the hiring manager's needs. So they're handling much more niche roles with low inbound. So we actually lower their requisition load so they're not overexhausting themselves from that point of view.
That makes sense. Todd asks, how in depth does the sourcer go when discussing information about the position? Are sourcers primarily gathering information rather than disseminating specific job information?
For us, the sourcer basically sells the company. They do that first. And then for us, the sourcing team has a different screen for each of our positions or business units. And so they will conduct a brief screen to get information, but they're also encouraged, to find out information about what would prevent that person from taking the role if it were offered to them today. So those are understood beforehand. So that's how we do it here.
Our sourcers know as much about the job as our recruiters do. They attend the intakes with the hiring manager. If they come onto a role after it's already been opened, they essentially conduct an intake with the recruiter and then later sync with the hiring manager to ensure that they have all the information. So they're willing and able to provide as much job information as the candidate needs to know. I think, as typical with any first interview, a lot of it is just like high level basic alignment on, work environment, culture, location, compensation, those types of things. But sourcers have access to all of that information, are encouraged to share as the candidate needs to know in order to decide to move forward.
We do a mixture between both April and Keri. It's absolutely imperative that we sell the candidate because we ask you to speak to us, but also at the same time, it's absolutely imperative that our sourcers know what's going on with the rec so they can truly sell the role to its full potential.
I like it. Jared asks, what communication do sourcers appreciate most from candidates who are not interested?
A reason why, so they can overcome their objection.
For sure. The why is the most important part, right?
The reason why, or a good time to follow up with maybe an explanation.
And always remember that no is just a request for more information a lot of the time. So
That's right.
Don't give up.
And I always say, try to connect with that sourcer after, because you never know where your career may lead you, and they may be in a position to really help you and get you through the door.
Yeah, I'm always confused why people are really rude to people in talent acquisition too, because I'm like, that follows you. That you might as well be polite in your decline. It's not going to hurt our feelings.
That is so true. Lindsay asks, what tactics have you seen work best with your teams for diversity sourcing?
We do a ton of diversity sourcing here at Box. It's a pillar of ours. It's super important. So actually, when you're looking at candidates, look at things that underrepresented talent may be connected to, such as if they're part of a HBCU or if they're part of a Greek lettered organization for female, Black, or Latinx, or whatever diversity is for your company, making sure that you're identifying Boolean strings that align with diversity. And then, of course, joining organizations and being a true ally. So connecting closely with your ERC, because they always have great referrals, right? So making sure that you're doing that internal sourcing as well when you're connecting with your ERCs and asking them to put the referral in your hand so you don't have to do as much work.
I like it. We probably have time for one more question. We've got, in order to manage the sourcer rec loads, do you have a vetting process to ensure the sourcers are focused on the most critical areas of the business? If so, how do you do this?
Anybody can take it out. If not, I have an answer.
Right. I would say I don't necessarily have a vetting process, but really just staying close to our directs and understanding what's on their plate. We also feel that it's important, although sourcing is their day-to-day, that they do other project work that affects the business as well. So understanding the projects that they have on their plate and understanding the rec load, and everyone's different. So I more so do one-on-ones to understand how they're feeling and where they're at.
We have a different, a list of essential ways that we prioritize how a rec is selected. And it includes things like business priority, urgency, asking questions like, is there revenue tied to this goal? Is there, something that we're going to miss on the product roadmap if we don't hire this engineer? We are always staying close to the business and to the business leaders so that we can have conversations with them like, hey, this person is saying this is what's most important. This person is what's saying this is most important. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out, because we're about to start another sprint and we want to make sure that roles are allocated correctly. And so that's kind of how we decide. And then we'll put roles on deck for okay, once we're done working on this role to satisfaction, then we'll consider working on your role. We don't want people, as new priorities emerge, we don't want people to feel like we're not hearing or that we're willing to serve our internal customers. We just have to be really good about communicating what is going on.
And with that, I think that's a wrap. Huge thank you to Jim for making today's presentation possible. Brandy, April, Keri, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to partner with us on this panel. Your insight is so appreciated, and I hope that we can work on more things like this in the future. Your expertise is always welcome within this community. Just a quick reminder, this was recorded, so be on the lookout for an email from us tomorrow that will contain a link to the recording. If anybody out there in the audience wants to get involved with this programming, either by suggesting topics or lending your voice to some of the discussions that we have on the horizon, please feel free to reach out to me. And with that being said, I will let everybody break. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.